Hello and welcome to WhatCulture MMA. My name is Joe Hendry and I'm here with the one and only James Dixon, and today we are going to preview the upcoming UFC 202. Now, we just want to prefix this by saying we apologize in advance. We are not going to be giving a whole lot of time to the undercard because we both come from professional wrestling backgrounds, so the fighter that we identify with most here, the fight that we want to talk about is obviously the main event of the evening, which is the rematch between Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz. So, James, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. Good long intro.
Sorry.
I'm used to it. The undercard, I don't think we're doing it a disservice. I think that is a one-match show if there's ever a one-match show in UFC.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
mean, Glover Teixeira versus, now I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly, but him versus Anthony Rumble Johnson is obviously, that's going to be a hard-hitting matchup that people want to see, and it's always fun when Donald Cerrone fights. So, those interest me personally.
I'm sure it'll be good.
Yeah.
I just don't think anybody's buying the card for either of those fights
I'm
any of
not.
the other fights.
I'm not.
Nobody is.
I'm very invested in this main event, so I'm keen to get your thoughts on it.
Conor has done the greatest job of publicizing this fight. Everybody in UFC, everybody in wrestling could learn from how he has promoted this fight. And I think we should probably talk about some of the things that Conor's done in the lead up as well as the fight itself, because it's almost more important than the fight, all the stuff that comes before it with Conor. And the way he's sort of ripped into everybody from every sport.
Yeah.
It hasn't just been, other fighters, it's also been wrestlers. I mean, he caused a stir in the wrestling industry the other week. And then he started doing it with football players now as well. Cristiano Ronaldo, he said he'd rip his head off, things like that.
Well, it's like what Chael Sonnen said. That his famous quote is, "No one ever sold any tickets on respect."
Right.
Know? So,
right.
and this, he is essentially writing the blueprint for how business should be done in mixed martial arts. And now you're seeing a lot of fighters starting to up their game with the trash talking, which is, in my opinion, I think Michael Bisping has upped his game with trash talking, probably directly influenced by Conor McGregor.
I think a lot of guys are influenced by Conor.
And now look at him. He's not only the middleweight champion of the world, but he's now even more of a draw, in my opinion.
Is it any surprise, though, if you look at the buy rates that Conor fights pull, look at the buy rates that Ronda fights pull, especially when it was sort of her and Misha and they were at each other's throats and really going for each other, and you knew there was this real hatred there. Any fights where there's personalities do better than fights where it's just, two great fighters.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there'd be a lot of fighters in UFC now who are at the top ahead of Conor if it was purely based on ability. Because Conor's not the greatest fighter, in my opinion.
I think he's pretty good.
Of course he's pretty good.
Well, when I say pretty good,
good.
I think he's absolutely world class. But I mean, I think the thing is, it's like I've kind of followed MMA for a long time and I've been interested in it. But I kind of I've dropped in and out over the years. But with him, I have to know everything with him. I'm fully invested. And one of the things that I'm interested in is the mental warfare aspect of it. Now, how many times has Conor McGregor fought and they've said, no, let's discount the last fight, but up until the first Nate Diaz
fight. It was a bit different the last fight anyway.
Everyone was saying, this is the guy to beat him. It was
sure.
I remember watching his fight against Chad Mendes, and everyone was saying, Mendes is going to take him down, he's going to grind him out, there's just no way. And then there was Aldo, and look what happened there. He's, quote unquote, starched him in 13 seconds. So, and that was again the mental warfare, and that's the thing, Jose Aldo was on paper, pound for pound greatest arguably, but he was terrified of McGregor, and he let that get to him. Now the thing with Nate is he's not afraid.
No,
McGregor.
he's not.
He's not.
He can match him in that regard.
Yeah.
He can play the mind games with Conor, and I think that's what makes it so interesting, and that's why this fight is so interesting. And with Conor especially, even if Conor loses, I don't think it hurts his drawing power at all.
No, I don't think it does.
He's such a shameless, in a good way, self-promoter.
Absolutely.
As he should be.
Absolutely. And I mean the thing is, it's like you've got so we've had this fight, we've got the second one. Let's look at it. If Conor wins, then I think he's perhaps worth more than he would have been had he just beat Nate straight up the first time. That's debatable.
Possibly
but
so.
We've now seen him in a vulnerable state, and he'll have been able to overcome adversity. So he maybe even more of a draw. I may be wrong on that, but I'm just saying I think he will bounce back if he wins completely.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah,
And
he will.
and
UFC
think about-
want him to win.
Yeah, and of course, because then we've got the third matchup to look forward to, which is going to draw crazy numbers as well. So this is the thing about Nate. He's in a cushy position in that if he loses, then he's still got to look forward to probably the biggest payday.
Yeah, I mean,
Anyway,
that's the thing. It's like a lot of classic, rivalries in UFC. You can get 3 good matches out of these guys, 3 good fights, and 3 good paydays for them. So I think McGregor will win, and I think everybody behind the scenes wants McGregor to win.
Oh, absolutely.
And I almost think Nate, for him, is it better if McGregor wins?
Is
Not
it-
to open a can of worms there or suggest anything, but just is it? I'm not saying he's going to lay down for McGregor.
Yeah. The pressure's not on him. Let's put it
Yeah,
that way.
but is it better for him if Conor wins?
Money-wise, it probably is.
Just something to consider.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. I mean, obviously, there's the rumours that if Conor was to have beaten Nate the first time, he would have gone on to face a returning GSP. I mean,
That rumor never dies.
yeah, because
that
I
rumor
mean,
never dies.
yeah, GSP was, people say he was sitting there in a suit for a reason.
It's got to happen at some
Yeah.
point, and it'll probably be the biggest fight they ever do. What can top it?
Yeah,
GSP track record drawing on pay-per-view is phenomenal. Conor, hard to top Conor. There's very few can, and the two of them together, it would blow records out of the water.
absolutely. And I mean, I think we have seen super fights in the past, but they never seem to happen at the right time. You've
Right,
got,
right.
And some of them don't happen. Like I remember, the fight I really wanted to see was Brock Lesnar versus Fedor for the heavyweight
Right.
title. That would have been the
Sure.
one. GSP versus Anderson Silva. That would have been the one. Now, to me, even though
Could still happen though.
it
is the wrong time for that, though.
But I'm talking about when they were both
Yeah,
the
at the
champion.
peaks,
That would
yeah.
have been the matchup that I want to see. Whereas I think even though GSP, people might say he's past his prime or whatever. I don't think you can ever count GSP
I don't think
out
so
of
either.
anything. The guy, in my opinion, he's the greatest of all time. That's in my opinion.
I think there's a strong argument for it. Who could you rank? Who's close to him, really?
Well,
all
Anderson
round,
Silva, there's the argument for it.
Anderson is. I mean,
Yeah.
I think Anderson's legacy's been hurt a little bit by the last couple of years.
Sure.
But you sort of need to look past that and sort of judge these guys at the peaks in the primes. And he was in his prime for a long time.
I mean, Fedor was always in the discussion, but again, he never fought in the UFC. People will say he didn't test himself against the absolute top competition.
Probably true.
Which
Probably
which is a factor.
It
so
is. I mean, it's sort of like bring it back to wrestling just a little bit, because I'm sure there's fans crossover here on this channel. It's there's some guys who've never been to WWE, and a lot of fans, for as great as they won't consider them amongst the greats. And like Sting, for example.
Yeah.
Is he a true great because he's had literally 2 matches in WWE? It's that kind of thing, and it's the same with Fedor and UFC, I think.
Well, just to touch upon what you've said about professional wrestling, obviously, all of the fans on our wrestling channel are going to be aware of Conor McGregor, and
Of
they're
course.
also going to be aware about the controversial comments that he's made towards
Right.
pro wrestlers and the professional wrestling community. Now, the thing, I never for a second, as a professional wrestler myself, I never took offense to that. There was
Me
a
neither.
little, it caught me for a moment, but then what I thought was that personally, I thought, is Conor trying to create some inroads with the WWE here? I mean, that's what I thought originally. What did you make about that?
I wasn't so sure he was trying to create inroads with WWE. He may be, but I don't think he needs to create
No,
inroads
he doesn't
with
need
WWE.
to. That's why it confused me. I wonder why he would.
He doesn't.
Yeah.
He clicks his fingers and they would
Yeah.
have him.
Was he just testing the water?
No, he knew that the wrestling audience is large. The wrestling audience is not too dissimilar to the fighting audience, and there certainly is a crossover. Whether fighting fans like to admit it, there is a crossover there.
100%.
Especially since Lesnar's fight, and Punk coming and all that kind of stuff. So he knows that audience. He knows that audience is vast. So he is trying to generate interest in this fight with the wrestling audience. People thinking that, look, if I insult wrestling, all these wrestlers are going to kick off. All the wrestling fans are going to kick off. They're going to hate me, but they're going to buy the pay-per-view to see me get my ass kicked, And it's promotion. what did it achieve by doing it? Everybody's talking about him.
We were all
Everybody's
talking about it. And it got people, for good or for bad, it got everyone emotionally invested in it from the professional wrestling point of view. And I think if we're, you've seen the clips online of him walking down the corridor to, singing No Chance, Vince McMahon's entrance theme. So he's a huge fan of
He is a huge fan. He's like, he basically has patented his act on Ric Flair in his prime. He is a modern day Ric Flair. There's differences, obviously, but it's the same kind of act.
Yeah.
And for these guys not to realize, including Flair, that he's just working everybody, he's playing a character. He's playing a role. He's trying to generate interest by being the Conor McGregor persona. And he knows that ripping into wrestling and wrestling fans is going to cause this.
Absolutely. And he's not afraid to do it. And he's not afraid to do it. Whereas some people, I find, some superstars in MMA are very sensitive about what people think of them. Whereas the two that stick out to me is Chael Sonnen and Conor McGregor, the ones who were never afraid to be the bad guy.
Right. And Ronda played into that very well.
Yeah, sorry.
And, big time. And, because it was the ultimate. She was the bad guy against Misha, and Misha was this underdog who everyone was supporting. I remember when Ronda came out for that fight, and it was just people hated her. She's turned it around since, but people despised her.
Absolutely,
when she made her entrance. But she played into that.
But they were willing to pay to see the fight.
Of course they were, and I think it's the same with Conor. And there's a reason that Conor's up here when it comes to what he can draw, and some of the fighters 100%. Who are better than him are way, way, way below. And
actually, publicly, the Fertitta brothers have never been shy about, this is before the sale, they were never shy about the fact that the business model they wanted to emulate, to copy, was the business model of the WWE.
Of course it is. And
they've done it.
They've succeeded and surpassed them as well. WWE, if it was sold today, would not go for $4 billion. It would go for maybe 1.5 to 2 if people overpaid. The share value makes it worth about 1.5 billion, and that's probably what they'd get. It's based on EBITDA and a lot of other financial things that are too boring to even contemplate now. But that's probably, analysts think if they were ever to sell, it'd be about 1.5 to 2 billion, half the worth of UFC, and they've done that in 20 years. WWE's been around 50 odd years, 60 years, nearly. So. It just shows you that they have taken that model and they've improved on it, and they understand, listen to what the fans want, give them the fights they want to see, make these dream matches, make these dream cards, make these huge, programs between a bad guy and a good guy. And they understand that completely, and that's why you've seen recently the likes of Conor who are cutting interviews almost in character. There's definitely a realism to it, but, it's still a character, and people who think Conor McGregor is exactly as he is when you see him doing his interviews, don't be fooled. He's playing everybody, and a lot of the guys are, and it's all a game.
So you mentioned there about the realism aspect of it. So coming back to the realism of it, because obviously we've commented on all the buzz and all the promotion, but when it comes to the actual fight itself, you said that you believe Conor is going to win.
I think he will win.
Can you just break that down for us a little bit with respect to what you saw the last time and what you think will be different this time?
I think Conor's going to come in all guns blazing because he's that kind of guy. He's not going to... He's going to be cocky because he's Conor. He's going to try and goad Nate into making a mistake or coming at him and falling into his trap. And, I think that's probably what will happen. I don't see it going particularly long, and I think Conor will catch him pretty early.
Can Conor knock him out, though?
I think so, yeah.
Even with the weight difference?
Yeah, it's a factor, but it depends how Nate reacts to Conor's antics, I think. Remember when Chris Weidman knocked out Anderson Silva?
Yeah.
The first time.
Yeah.
Anderson's messing around, boom, catches him. I think you might have something similar to that, but the other way around. So Conor's the guy messing around, causes Nate to get angry and charge at him. Conor knows it's coming.
Well, that's what he did to Jose Aldo, really,
yeah,
wasn't he? He riled him up so much.
Yeah.
There was a...
I don't think it'd be as quick as that.
Well, there was a member of the press who, at the post-fight press conference against Jose Aldo, that card, where he came out and says, Conor, do you mind if I share with the people in the room what you told me before the fight? And Conor says, you may. And the journalist said that Conor told him before the fight, I think Jose Aldo is agitated, he's frustrated, and I think he will overextend, and I'm going to catch him with that hook.
Yeah,
And
it's exactly what he did.
It was exactly what happened, and that was pretty terrifying. And we hadn't seen Conor in a really vulnerable state before that. So that's why I think one of the reasons why he had this godlike status, because, you know, like he said, he didn't just pick the outcome, he picked the round.
Yeah.
Just from my point of view, the one thing that caught me, I mean, I'm, you know, the biggest Conor fan there is. Right? I mean, when I get hugely invested in his fights because I think when he wins, it's good for the business. It's good for the professional wrestling business.
It's good for everybody.
It's good for the fight business, and you know, I believe that bleeds over to professional wrestling.
I believe
as well.
so.
I think it does. But never in my life have I put on weight and gone, my cardio's fantastic right now. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's the thing. Now, do you remember when this fight was originally scheduled for a little bit early? I can't remember the exact date, but basically there was a whole fiasco where Conor didn't show up.
It was going to be UFC 200.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, 200, of course it is.
Yeah, it was going to be 200, and then they had the situation. That was another Conor player, you know, and you've got to wonder behind the scenes what the real story is.
I've got a theory on it.
Go for it.
I think that Conor intentionally didn't show up to the press conference in a way that he's not going to lose face, but I think he needed more time. He needed more time to build the cardio at 170. That's in my opinion what that was about.
It makes a lot of sense.
I may be wrong, but I think from his point of view, strategically, how can you put this back without losing face? Because he can't go, listen, I can't beat Nate on that day.
No, of course he can't. No, of course, and he understands the value of him winning this fight as much as, and you know, I think UFC understand that as well, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was just a big game from the lot of them. And there's always a chance as well that at that point they'd already got Brock tied down for UFC 200. And does Conor want to share the spotlight with Brock? You tell me.
Interesting.
You tell me.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't just all a big angle, as we say, then it may have been just ego coming into it with, you know, well, Brock Lesnar's coming in, well, you know, screw that. I'm the headline act, and he'll know that Brock's going to be. Everyone will talk about Brock.
Yeah.
You know, rightly or wrongly. So
that's a good point, because I actually watched the UFC preview for this. It was UFC Embedded, and it was, you know, it's really impressive. These things are super well put together.
They're amazing.
I actually said within that was the more people tuned in for that than any other sort of pay-per-view event that they'd had.
Right.
So they were saying that had sort of the biggest pay-per-view audience up to that point. So like you say, perhaps Conor was wanting to kind of flex his muscles a bit with how much of a draw that he was.
Yeah.
And I rewatched the fight as well, the original one, and one thing that I noticed was I actually didn't think Conor looked uncomfortable on the ground. There's a bit where it goes to the ground.
Yeah.
And there's debate.
Yeah,
but there was one moment apart. I'm not talking about the double leg at the end where he then gets choked out. I'm talking about the initial one, the initial exchange where Diaz pulls guard and McGregor lifts Diaz's leg to, you know, I'm not a jiu-jitsu practitioner, so I'm not going to go into details about this. No. But he managed to posture out of it and get him into a position where he was going to be able to do some damage, and, you know, Diaz grabbed a hold again. But, you know, people are talking about Conor as if he's a beginner in grappling.
Yeah, I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly.
It's ridiculous.
And I feel he maybe doesn't get the credit in that area.
And, you know, it's possibly for him that might be a good thing, you know, because who knows what he can actually do on the mat, you know? If Nate underestimates what he can do on the mat, that could be Nate's undoing, potentially. I mean, I don't think he's going to out-wrestle him, but, you know, it's interesting. There's probably more to Conor than we've actually seen. I don't think he's shown us his full hand yet.
Now, Nate Diaz has mentioned that he trains against the top-level training partners where he feels that Conor doesn't. Does that play a factor in this? Is it true?
I don't know. I wouldn't like to say. I mean, you tell me, man. You've got your finger on the pulse more than I have. What do you think about
Well,
that
I mean,
claim?
obviously the guys in Diaz's camp, you know, you've got your Jake Shields, you've got your Nick Diaz, you've got, you know, that's a tight-knit community where these guys are super athletes. And, you know, Conor is the clear standout name in his camp. Now, I listened to Eddie Bravo on the Joe Rogan podcast talking about different methodologies for becoming a top-level fighter, and he was saying that some people believe that it needs to be kind of stone on stone, like, you know, the best versus the best in training. Like, if you could imagine, for example, the sparring sessions between Daniel Cormier and Cain Velasquez, you know, you can't argue with the results there. But then there's other people who believe that you need to get used to the idea of finishing and dominating to build that confidence. So perhaps it's that training style that has lent itself to Conor's unbelievable self-confidence. Maybe there's a balance. Maybe some things work for other people. I don't know. It's just something that's been commented on a lot, and I just wondered what you thought.
It's an interesting point. I mean, what I will say, though, is way back in the day when, like, Dan Severn was around, you know, his training camp for the first UFC he did consisted of wrestlers from Al Snow's training school who he just threw around.
Yeah.
Doing amateur wrestling with. And he was quite successful.
Yeah.
And that was basically his camp. And then you can get sort of CM Punk, who's, you know, great camp. How long's it taken him to get anywhere near the level? And even then, we don't know what he's going to be like. I mean, I'm still convinced he's going to last about 10 seconds.
I just think that I'm just going to throw my 2 cents in here.
Please.
I'm considering putting a little bet on CM Punk. Because
what, to get knocked out?
What? No, because
to win.
I think he's a smart guy. I think he's a super smart guy.
Yeah.
And he doesn't strike me. You know, the art of war is don't engage in a battle that you don't think you can win.
Sure.
CM Punk doesn't strike me as the type of character to go into something that he doesn't think he can overcome. You know. So I know we're sidetracking a bit, but we'll maybe cover that on a.
That's probably one for later. That's for the next time.
I mean, we've passed the 20-minute mark.
We have. We should probably wrap this up.
We'll probably wrap up.
One thing we should point out, though, is that UFC are doing a pay-per-view in Manchester.
They are indeed.
On October 8th. Now, one of the people Conor McGregor has been arguing with back and forth, or certainly one of the people who has reacted to Conor, is Kurt Angle, who is in Manchester on October 8th for the WCPW wrestling shows. Just saying.
Now, am I right in saying that the UFC has a later start time? So
yeah, I think they start like 1 a.m. or something like that.
So Kurt Angle will be.
I'm just saying, if Conor wants to put his money where his mouth is, I'm sure Kurt would be more than willing to accommodate him.
And you know, I mean, Kurt Angle's a competitor. He's not going to back down.
Of course he wouldn't. Now, he's basically called him out anyway.
So what happens if Kurt Angle gets a hold of Conor McGregor?
He'll kill him. Kurt Angle would destroy him. Even now, you know, it's a long time since he did amateur wrestling. You know, it's a long time. And he's got 20 years of wrestling, pro wrestling damage to contend with. You know, he's got a bad neck, that kind of thing. But Kurt Angle would still school him immediately. It's...
Now, we've heard the stories.
I'm not convinced Conor could do anything to Kurt.
We've heard the stories. Kurt Angle's not afraid to get in a scrap with anyone.
Right.
You know, obviously the famous story
with
is
Brock.
getting a backstage scrap with Brock Lesnar.
It wasn't even backstage. It was in the ring.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
so,
it was in the ring.
Non-public. So
non-public,
it's
proper shoot.
To be willing to go into that scenario in those deep waters with a super athlete like that in front of the whole locker room,
pride at stake.
I don't think he's going to back down from
no chance.
170-pound Conor McGregor.
So I mean, the ball's sort of in Connor's court there.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
maybe
if he wants to put his money where his mouth is, he can go to Manchester with UFC and come and pay Kurt a visit. They can do it in the privacy of the locker room if they really want to do it.
Yeah, or maybe Kurt might fancy a trip to
UFC.
The UFC after the show.
Maybe they'll invite him.
Who knows? Who knows? Anyway, we're having a little bit of fun with that.
We are.
But obviously, UFC 202 is coming up this weekend. We can't wait for it. We hope you guys have enjoyed this little discussion. We're going to do more things like this. Please, in the comment section below, let us know what topics you want covered. Let us know what you want us to have a little chat about. And I just want to thank you for being on this first edition. This has been good. And we've been WhatCulture MMA. So thanks very much for watching. And we'll see you next time.
Have you ever wanted to learn everything about the man with the greatest moustache in the history of combat sports? I'm talking, of course, about Dan the Beast 7. He's one of the most recognized fighters in MMA history, holding UFC gold and NWA gold at the same time. And in this book, Realest Guy in the Room, we swear it's not about Enzo Amore, he unloads on all of it. His humble beginnings, his rise to the top of MMA, his whole thing with Ken Shamrock, his time in WWF. So if you're young and have never heard of him, you owe it to yourself to pick this book up and learn a lot about a man who is very, 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 very good at hitting people. You can pick it up at shop.whatculture.com. Follow the link in the description.